Ladies and gentlemen, sports fans alike, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago, one of the couple, two, three best podcasts around. So sit back, grab yourself a cold one and a Polish sausage, park your keister in the French room, and listen to Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
In Chicago, you know that all sports rock. The Bears, Hawks, Bulls, Cubs, and Sox. Pick your favorite, you can choose, as long as the Packers lose. For everything you need to know, it's Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. This is your host, Sean. On this episode, we've got a football-only episode. We're going to be talking about the Chicago Bears, their offseason moves, what their roster is going to look like, and the linebackers from upcoming NFL Draft. All of this and more in this episode of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. But first, we'd like to thank our sponsor, the Rockford Ice Hogs. If you're not familiar with the Rockford Ice Hogs, they're the AHL minor league team of the Chicago Blackhawks. Get to see the Stars of Tomorrow today, located just 90 minutes from the city limits, and affordable fun for the whole family with tickets just starting at $7. It's Rockford Ice Hogs. At the beautiful BMO Harris Bank Center, the next home game is Tuesday, March 15th, with $2 beers, $2 pops, and $2 hot dogs. Only 7 home games left, so check them out now. Like I said, only 90 minutes from the city limits and affordable fun for the whole family. IceHogs.com. So this show is going to be only about the Bears and college football and the NFL draft, etc. Football-only episode. I was going to talk a little bit about the Blackhawks and the Bulls and the spring training baseball, but with the excitement of free agency in the NFL, I'm just going to focus on that. I promise next week you will get all 4 major sports. Promise. But I didn't know what to expect with Ryan Pace and the second-year GMs stepping into free agency this year. We had a lot of guys that were last year that he signed to one-year prove-it deals, and some of them proved it, like Porter, like Jarvis Jenkins. Some of them didn't, like Alan Ball. I didn't know what exactly to expect. I mean, he didn't make a huge splash last year other than, he signed Antrell Roll, which was a modest deal, but then a fairly big deal with Pernell McPhee. And he said time and time again that he doesn't want to build this team through free agency, and then he needs to build it through the draft. And what you have now is, so going into it, Bears had a ton of money to spend. A ton. Even after franchise tagging Alshon Jeffrey, they had a ton of money to spend. So it was a situation where, were they going to spend it? Were they not going to spend it? We didn't know. And they came out and they made a splash. They signed probably their biggest hole on the team was inside linebacker, and they went out and signed 2 of them. They signed 2 inside linebackers, the first one being Super Bowl champion Danny Trevathan, and that was, I think, a really big splash that's going to anchor you right there for your hopefully years to come. They signed him to, what was it, a 5-year deal? And then they signed a 3-year deal to Jarrell Freeman, who previously played for the Indianapolis Colts. I think he's a solid player, but he's not going to be a Pro Bowl player. Then they signed Bobby Massey, who is the right tackle for the Arizona Cardinals. What this is going to happen is this is going to cause a whole ripple effect in the offensive line. He's going to be kicked over to the right side on the right tackle. It's going to allow Kyle Long to move back to right guard. And it's really going to anchor the right side of that line. They're going to be able to run off of that right side of the line. And that leaves you with, who your starting center is going to be. It's going to be Hronis Grasu. Your left guard's going to be Matt Slauson. And you've got the right side set. Now that leaves either Charles Leno Jr. going to be their starting left tackle, or there's still opportunity for them to go out and make a move. But that's who the Bears have signed so far. And then they've gone out and re-signed some of their own free agents. They signed a 2-year deal to Mitch Unrein, a 2-year deal to Sherrick McManus, another deal with Jaquiz Rogers to be that third running back spot, another year for Mariani. They re-signed Porter to play cornerback. So a lot of free agent flurry, and it's... I mean, I keep hearing, quote-unquote, media experts. They keep saying, well, the Bears are still going to be at least 2 seasons away from competing for anything. I think that's crap. I mean, will the Bears compete? I can't say. But to say that there's no way that they can compete this year is really short-sighted and silly. I mean, this team progressed really far with 1 season under this coaching staff. They, unlike the Lovey eras when they started off strong and faded at the end, this team started off slow and got stronger towards the end. Even with rotating guys and injuries on that defensive line, they still were able to put up a fairly decent defense, and the offense is going to be much better this year, I believe, when you have healthy wide receivers. I mean, it was their wide receiver core was in shambles last year. So I don't understand why they couldn't compete. I mean, it's not like Green Bay went out and got a lot better. It's not like the Minnesota Vikings went out and got a lot better. And with Megatron retiring, it's not like the Lions got a lot better. So who cares if the only teams you're really competing with is you want to go and win your division. That's your goal. Once you win your division, then you're in the playoffs. Then you can focus on other teams. But you have to win your division. You have to build your team to win your division. And this team, I don't see why it's out of the realm of possibility that they can't go out and win the division. I mean, we looked at what their weak spots were, and it was cornerback, safety, inside linebacker, defensive line. They went out and they got 2 inside linebackers. They signed, which was one of their own, but they signed a cornerback. They signed one of their own, a defensive tackle, and they're still not done making moves. And they still have the draft, and they still have another offseason of coaching and getting better. And their offensive line needed to improve, and they did. They brought in a right tackle, and they're moving their Pro Bowl their tackle back to being a Pro Bowl left guard or a right guard, and so you're going to improve the offensive line there. I don't see why they couldn't be a contender for this division. So what else is out there? What else is out there is from what I'm hearing, is the Bears made a serious offer for Jermaine Gresham, the tight end. They made a serious offer for C.J. Anderson for running back. And both of those guys opted to go. One opted to stay with the team he was on. The other one opted to go with a coach that he knew. But that tells me that the Bears are still players out there, and there's still going to be moves to be made. And you know that Ryan Pace is going to make those 1-year prove-it deals. He's going to go out there and sign some guys and say, hey, listen, we want to see what you got. We're going to give you 1 year to prove your worth. And this is the NFL. There's going to be a lot of those deals to be had. Guys that are coming off injury, guys that are, didn't get the big money they were looking for, guys that feel they could get more money next year, or guys that are older. There's a lot of these guys, and some of them will pan out and some of them won't. And they're low cost deals, low risk, high reward. But the way it's shaking out right now is, if we were to look at the Bears roster, we have left tackle Charles Leno. We have Matt Slauson at left guard, Hronis Grasu at center, Kyle Long at right guard, and Bobby Massey at right tackle. I mean, I'm not in love with Leno Jr. at left tackle, but he fared well last year. I mean, he handled himself. He was about average, which is not too bad. And if you shore up the rest of the offensive line, that's not a bad offensive line. Your wide receiver core has already gotten better because you brought back Alshon Jeffrey, and you're going to have a healthy Kevin White and a healthy Eddie Royal. That's always a good thing. And when you have Marquise Wilson, I still like Marquise Wilson, and have him as your fourth wide receiver, I'm okay with that. You have Cutler back and Langford, Carey, and Jaquiz Rogers as your running backs. That's not a bad offense you have there. It's just putting it together. And the continuity of keeping the same system and keeping Dow Logans as you're moving him from quarterbacks coach to offensive coordinator, I think that's going to keep some continuity there and not start fresh. On defense, you've got Fuller and Porter as your corners, Pernell McPhee and Lamar Houston as your outside linebackers, and then with Jarvis Jenkins signing with the Jets, you're probably going to have Ego Ferguson and Mitch Unrein as your defensive ends right as it stands right now, and Eddie Goldman as your nose tackle, Danny Trevathan and Jarrell Freeman as your inside linebackers, and Amos and Antrell Roll as your safeties. Now there's still some work to be done, but there's still free agents out there, and there's still the draft. Looking at this is based on the Bears' needs and based on the signings they have. I'm going to guess, I'm going to throw this out there, is I think the guy they're probably really targeting in the draft is DeForest Buckner, the defensive tackle from Oregon. I have a strong feeling now that I think he's the guy that the Bears really want, but I would be shocked if he fell to 11. I see him as probably being somewhere 4 through 7, somewhere in there. I would be shocked if he fell to 11. So either the Bears are going to try to put a package together to move up. Maybe that package includes Martellus Bennett. I don't know. But I think that's the guy who they want. But the Bears are going to have to get a little more stout at defensive tackle, defensive / 3-4 defensive end. I would love to see them add another pass rusher, but that's it's not the most critical position. I would love to see them add a left tackle, another cornerback, another safety, and another tight end. They still have the moves or the money to make moves to fill in some of those spots, but we shall see. It's not out of the realm of possibility for the Bears to bring back Zach Miller, tight end, which I think would shore up a lot of it. There's Vernon Davis is also still out there. He's 32, but he won a Super Bowl, and then I think he's still got another couple years left in him. That's always a possibility, even though there's rumors that he's going to be a Redskin. So that would shore up some tight end. You could also keep Martellus Bennett, even though he's a whiner and a crybaby, but he's still a good player. And maybe that's a possibility too. Is they shore that up that way. You still have Russell Okung. He's available to play tackle. You can move him out there, and he's going to be better than Charles Leno Jr. But he's got some serious interest out there. There's not too many other left tackles that are available. Let's see. Defensive lineman. Akeem Hicks. He's still out there, and I wonder what's going on because the Patriots want him back. The Lions want him. The rumor is the Bears want him, but nobody's offered a contract yet. He's only 26 years old, and he's really versatile. 6'5", 324 pounds, and he's been a really valuable commodity out there because of his age and his skill set. He can play in either a 3-4 or a 4-3. In a 3-4, he's going to be a defensive end, and in a 4-3, he's going to be a defensive tackle. He had a really good year last year with New England, rotating in, and had a great year. So I think signing him would be a real coup and shore up that defensive line a lot. BJ Raji's still out there, but he's going to fill that same void as as Eddie Goldman filled, so I don't really see too much need for him. So not a lot of defensive linemen left. You sort of short up your outside linebackers, other than the pass rusher. And I'm not going to suggest that this is a good route to go, but Aldon Smith is out there. He's only 27 years old, and he can't be reinstated till at least November, but he's out there, and he would absolutely help a team because he could go out there and just dominate another team. And if you put Pernell McPhee on one side and Aldon Smith on the other, and then rotate in Willie Young and Lamar Houston, opposing quarterbacks are going to get eaten up. That's just the way it works. But do the Bears want to risk the scrutiny they're going to get by signing a guy like that? I don't think they do. Cornerbacks, there's not much out there. It's pretty much nothing out there. And safety, you've got Rashad Johnson from Arizona. He's out there. Walter Thurman from the Eagles. He's out there. Eric Weddle is still out there. He's a little bit older, but apparently he's got offers from 4 different teams, and he's supposed to make a decision in the next couple days, like Monday, Tuesday. So theoretically, by the time you listen to this, he could be a Bear. I don't know. But I think the Bears are still actively active out there. They do still have some holes that they need to fill, but I think this team still has some question marks on defense, but it's shaping up to be much, much better than they were. Depending on who they get in the draft, they could really shore them up. I mean, I think now cornerback, safety, defensive end, the 3-4 defensive end are the big spots of need, and if they can address those three, that could be a really solid team. And like I said, if they are able to get their hands on DeForest Buckner, that suddenly shores up that defensive line. You've got two good outside linebacker pass rushers. You've add DeForest Buckner next to Eddie Goldman, who are suddenly now forced to be reckoned with. You've got your middle linebackers solidified, and then it's adding depth at that cornerback and safety positions. So with that, why don't we step on over to talking about the inside linebackers from this year's draft. Now, when I plotted out what I was going to do, I listed inside linebacker. I really started thinking about some guys that I think can play both positions. So I added a few guys that they either played both positions in college, or I think they could play both positions in the pros. So I added a little bit. But if you're not familiar with the show, step back a minute, is we have every week from pretty much the Super Bowl or just after the Super Bowl all the way up till right before the NFL draft happens, we go through and evaluate one position every week. So I take a handful of guys that are likely in the top 4 rounds or so. I don't pick everybody and review them because I don't have enough time. But what I do is I look at actual game film. I don't look at highlight reels. I look at game film. I break down every single play and look at it, and I see what their good attributes are, their bad attributes are, and how I project them based on different characteristics to being a pro. And I spell it all off for you. And it's really time intensive, but I really love doing it. So if I don't cover a guy that you're interested in, please, by all means, hit me up and ask me to cover that guy. So I'll go back and absolutely do it. I just sort of draw an arbitrary line in the sand because I have other obligations outside of this podcast. So I don't have all the time in the world. But if there's somebody that you're definitely interested in, of course I'm going to do that. And if I haven't done it somebody and they get drafted by the Bears, I'm going to go back and review them too. So everybody's going to get reviewed that's drafted by the Bears, unless I can't find game film like Teo Fabuluje last year. I didn't have access to any of his game film, so it was something I couldn't do. So last week we did the tight ends. This week we're going to do the inside linebackers. Next week we're going to do safeties. Safeties. That should be a good one. I love something the Bears need. So let's start first with Reggie Ragland. Reggie Ragland out of Alabama, 6'1", 245. Pros, great against the run. Absolutely great against the run. He's a downhill runner, so he's got good forward game speed, and he sheds blocks really well. So when offensive linemen come in on him, if you watch his hand moves, he keeps them at an arm distance away, so he can easily shed them. What happens is if you let the offensive linemen get into your body, they're going to dominate where you go and be able to push you back. So if you're able to be strong enough and good enough, you can keep them, at hand's length and then be able to shed the block to make the tackle. And he does that really well. But some of the cons with Reggie Ragland are when he knifes in, and like if you remember the Briggs-Urlacher days when you'd have the offensive line moving one way and the whole play going one direction, and he would knife in between blockers and to make the tackle. Reggie Ragland, a lot of times when he knifes in, he misses the tackle. And it happened several times while I was watching Alabama game film. He's not great in coverage. So if he has to drop back in coverage, not so good. And he's got questionable speed when he's in a back pedal and when he runs laterally. So all in all, if you look at him from a top line perspective, I like Reggie Ragland, and I think he'll be a solid starter in the NFL. He's just not one of those absolute playmakers that's worth a top 15 pick. So if I'm the Bears, I wouldn't even think about him in the first round unless they trade back. But if he's available in the second round, absolutely, you'd consider taking him. I think he's a solid player. He's not the fastest guy, and you can work on some things with him. Next up is Kentrell Brothers, 6 foot 245 out of Missouri. He's got some nice instincts. He's got good downhill speed, so going forward from a play. But he's a questionable open field tackler, slow change of speed, and he gets lost in coverage. I like to call him a poor man's Reggie Ragland. He's not worth a first rounder in my opinion, despite all the rumors I'm hearing that he's going to be a first rounder. I don't see it. I don't see it at all. Next up is Dominique Alexander, 6 foot 232 out of Oklahoma. He's a really sure tackler, but he does not change speeds well. And if you watch, when he has to change speeds, he flails his arms weird, and when he does it, it's a really awkward motion, and I don't think he's as athletic as he probably needs to be a solid NFL linebacker. He looks kind of slow and plodding out there, and he's a real liability in coverage. I don't like Dominique Alexander. I don't think he has the skill sets to make your defense better. That's just my opinion. And then you have Tyler Matekovich from Temple, 6 foot 238. Pros, he has football smarts. He really understands what's going on out there. He's a really, really super hard try hard guy. And he anchored a defense that was a top 25 team last year. But he is slow. He is so slow. And he gets pancake blocked way too much. And he just, it's got to be an offensive lineman's dream to go out there and block him, because they just makes them look excellent, because they throw him around like a rag doll. If he's going to make the NFL, he's going to be a special teamer. He's a try-hard attitude, good attitude guy that could be a special teamer with his attitude and his willingness to do things, but he's not going to be a regular down everyday player at all. He's basically the Rudy of this year's draft class. Buyer beware if you draft him other than maybe the 6th or 7th round. Next is Scooby Wright, 6 foot 239 out of Arizona. He's got good speed going downhill. He can slice through the line, decent speed. He's a bit stiff, lacks athleticism to change speeds well. Again, I would probably say if you had Kentrell Brothers being the poor man's Reggie Ragland, I would say Scooby Wright would be the middle class man's Reggie Ragland. And then there's two outside linebackers that I project could very well play inside linebacker and do well. One would be Miles Jack, 6'1", 245 out of UCLA. He's the best linebacker in this draft. He's so good. He played outside linebacker and inside linebacker. He played both positions depending on the defense. Great speed, great instinct, can rush the passer. The cons, he has a temper on him. In a few games, he got into it with an offensive lineman rather than make the play. So the offensive lineman had a nice block, and instead of shedding the block and making the tackle, he went at it with the offensive lineman in a shoving match and blah, 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 and war words, and that's not what you need. And you can work on that, but that athleticism and the skill and the football IQ, it's all there, and he's a great player. He's also coming off an injury. That's a big con for everybody, and it's whether or not he can come back and play. But if he can come back and play at a high level, what he was capable of prior to the injury, he can play any linebacker spot, and he'll be a day one starter, and he's going to be a Pro Bowler. And then the last guy I want to talk about is Jalen Smith, 6'2", 223 out of Notre Dame. He can play outside linebacker or inside linebacker. He's stout enough to take on blockers and shed blocks. He's a really nice tackler, good in coverage. If he's going to play inside linebacker in the pros, he's going to have to put on a little more bulk. He looks thin-framed out there, and he's also coming off a major injury. If Miles Jack is the number one linebacker in the draft, he's 1B if he can come back from injury. So those two last guys I like a lot. But again, this is a really, really thin draft class. I don't like it. I don't think there's very many game-changing guys. There's a couple that I think are good, but so far I keep watching this, and I think there's two game-changing offensive tackles. I don't think there's any game-changing cornerbacks or wide receivers. There's a couple of game-changing running backs, but we all know that they're like almost a dime a dozen in the league anymore. Rarely do you draft a first-round running back. But there's a few game-changing running backs. You got to cut two, possibly three, if Connor Cook is able to come over those character issues. I think you have three game-changing quarterbacks. But this is not a top-heavy draft. This is kind of a weak draft this year. So if you're the Bears, you really got to work to find guys that are gonna fill in and fill those holes for you, because I think there's going to be a lot of busts. All of these clickbait websites where it's like, oh, go redrafting the whatever draft. They're going to say, I have a feeling they're going to say redrafting the historically bad 2016 NFL draft. And it's going to redraft, and there's going to be a handful of guys in each round that pans out well, but there's going to be a lot of busts, a lot. So I guess that's a good transition over to, I did my mock draft 4.0. So every week, in addition to scouting some players, I also do a mock draft for the Bears, and I do all 7 rounds. And instead of some ways that people do it where I'm like, oh, I like this guy in the first round and this guy in the second round, I want to add some semblance of reality into it. So I use a site called firstpick.com. So that's first-pick.com. And it's a really great site, and they have artificial intelligence draft. So it's computer-generated draft for all the other teams except for the team you're drafting. And they rank players based on whatever criteria. So they rank them, and then they look at team needs, and they sort of arbitrarily go through and draft guys for the other teams. So it adds some semblance of reality, because sometimes you'll have a player that's top notch that'll fall a few spots, a la Aaron Rodgers did when he was in the draft and fell to 22nd. So things like that. There's always there's always situations like that, so it's nice. I like to use that site. And so without any further ado, this is my mock draft 4.0 that I did yesterday, which was March 12th. With the 11th pick in the first round, I have the Bears taking Ronnie Stanley, offensive tackle from Notre Dame. I think Ronnie Stanley comes in, you plug him in at left tackle, instantly makes that offensive line go from a decent offensive line to a really good offensive line because you're solid at every position except center. And I think Coronas Grasu, with the offseason under his belt, is going to come in stronger and better, and you're going to have a really solid offensive line, which is, once you win in the trenches in the offense, that's where you become dominant. I like that Ronnie Stanley pick. With the 10th pick in the second round, I have the Bears drafting Connor Cook, quarterback, Michigan State. I like Connor Cook. I think he's as talented as any quarterback in this draft, and definitely more talented than any quarterback probably coming out next year. All the questions about him are on, can he be a leader? Is he a good character guy? Do people like him? I can't answer that because I've never met him and I don't have access to him. But if you have a quarterback with that much skill that falls to you in the second round, in the way that the NFL is working nowadays, you're silly to not take him. You're silly to not take him. You're not going to set your team back by picking a quarterback in the second round. If you pick a quarterback with the number 1 overall pick and he's bad, then you might be hurting your team. You're locking up salary. You lost another first-round draft pick if he's bad. But second-round pick, you can easily recover from that. And Connor Cook, if he is what I think he could be, you let him sit behind Jay Cutler for 2 years, and you've got your next starting quarterback. Bing, bang, boom. Win, win, win. And I know people are probably already furious with this mock draft because they're like, we need defense. You all pick 2 offensive players. We'll get to that as soon as I'm done with the draft. I swear I'll answer that question. With the 9th pick in the third round, I have Maurice Kennedy, cornerback out of Virginia. We need cornerback help. I think this could be a solid pickup. The 8th pick in the fourth round, I have the Bears taking TJ Green, safety out of Clemson. He was on that really great Clemson defense. I think he could help the Bears. With the 11th pick in the 5th round, I have the Bears taking Braylon Addison, wide receiver out of Oregon. With the 10th pick in the 6th round, I have the Bears taking Kevin Peterson, cornerback out of Oklahoma State. With the 29th pick in the 6th round, I had the Bears taking Darryl Worley, cornerback out of West Virginia. With the 31st pick in the 6th round, I have the Bears taking Aziz Shitu, defensive end out of Stanford. And with the 9th pick in round 7, I have the Bears taking outside linebacker Victor Ochi from Stony Brook. Now I know, like I said, I know a lot of you are probably seeing that and going, drafted a wide receiver and a quarterback and offensive tackle and 2 offensive players in the first 2 rounds. This team needs defense. And here's my response. This is a very, very weak draft class in my opinion. Very weak. I don't like this draft. I don't think it's very good. Last year, there was so many possibilities. There was so many good players, and you almost wanted to keep trading up and trading up. And this is the type of year that you wished you would have traded your first round pick this year to move up in last year's draft, because I thought there was a lot of playmakers in last year's draft. This year's draft class is pretty weak, and I don't like it. With that, you don't have, at the 11th pick, normally picking 11, you have a ton of guys you can pick from. I don't think there's a ton of guys that are worthy of being an 11th pick in most drafts. And my philosophy, and I know this differs than some people, but my philosophy with the NFL draft is you make your draft board. You say, this is the best guy in the draft. This is the second best guy in the draft. And so on and so forth. And you go down the list until you have a whole litany of guys. And when it comes to draft time, you say, I'm trusting my board. I worked really hard on this because once you're in the moment of the NFL draft, you can get very excited. You can fall in love with a guy. You can do silly things, and those silly things can hurt you. The NFL draft isn't all about who's the best at scouting. It's also who can play the best hand of poker. It is, not every time you're playing poker does the guy who's best at poker win. You need to be able to play it cool and show a poker face and be steadfast and be decisive. And if you aren't calm and you aren't cool and you aren't collected, you're going to lose. And that's the same with the NFL draft. Is you have to go in and be worked really diligently and scouted the players and done all of your homework and done your research and made your draft board. And when it comes down to it, you say, you look at it as, all right, I'm going to go through as if I'm not going to make a trade, and these are the guys I want. But if you see a guy that you are in love with, you can call and inquire about it. But if you're too gung-ho, somebody's gonna basically steal picks from you because they're gonna have a field day being like, well, I want this guy and this guy if you seem too eager. So it's not for the faint of heart. And so you can also get really excited and fall and want to reach for a guy, but you've really got to trust that draft board. And when it comes down to it, when you get to that 11th pick, you can't say, oh, well, I need a defensive tackle, and the best defensive tackle in this draft is already off the board. Well, I'm going to pick the second best defensive tackle. That's when you reach on guys, and that's when you start drafting poorly. Is you want to go out there and draft the best player available, because if you take the best player available, you're going to make your team better as a whole. Who cares if you already have a good running back in Jeremy Langford and a good backup with Kadeem Carey? If you're in the second round and Ezekiel Elliott is there, you draft Ezekiel Elliott because he is a huge value at that number 10 pick in the second round. He's an absolute value. You take him. You don't let somebody else have him. You figure out what you do with him. So that's how it works. Is you take the best guy available, and you can always figure out you can never have too many good players on your team, especially too many good players under rookie contracts. So pick the best player available. And I know the other day on was the show with Jim Miller. He was saying, well, you pick the best player for your needs, and I think that's silly because. If you say, well, I need defensive tackle is my biggest position of need, but you also need safety and corner, are you going to pick the best defensive tackle period and bypass a possibly better corner or better safety? No, you just pick the best guy available, and I'm going to stick with that philosophy until the day I die, is you pick the best player available. So in my draft, all of the guys that I would love to have, there's defensive players I would much rather have, I think, rate higher, like DeForest Buckner. But there's not a ton of guys in that up there that I think are that good. And in this draft, Ronnie Stanley fell to the Bears, and that's a coup because that's a huge position of need for the Bears. And if Ronnie Stanley's a guy that you plug and play, he's a good football player from a solid program. He's going to step in, and he's going to be able to play left tackle for you for a long time. So he was the best player available at that time. You went ahead and drafted him. You may not have improved your defensive line, but you improved your offensive line drastically, and that makes your team better. With the second round pick, Connor Cook, I think, is a steal in that second round. I think he's an absolute steal. I think if he was a huge locker room rah-rah guy that his team loved, he'd be a top 10 pick this year. To have a top 10 talent pick fall to you in the second round when this is a quarterback-driven league and your quarterback's in his 30s, you got to pull the trigger on that. And then so on and so forth as we go down the line is I just looked. So in this mock draft, I have 3 cornerbacks. And here's my rationale for it. This is a passing league. You need plenty of good cornerbacks, good, young, fast cornerbacks. And you have 3 6th-round picks. So I picked 2 6th-round pick cornerbacks. What are the odds one of them steps up and is a solid contributor on your defense? Not that good. Odds are he's going to be special teams guy. Special teams guys can play. So you figure if you draft 3 cornerbacks, one of them high with a 3rd rounder and 2 6th-rounders, is one of them is going to pan out to be a good player, and then at least one of them will be a special teamer. So just playing the odds. But I really look at this as when I go through my mock draft, I go, I'm going to pick the best player available. If there's nobody good there, I would be fine if the Bears traded back. And I would be fine if the Bears traded multiple picks and went forward, because I don't think there's a lot in this draft. I think you're gaining value. I think normally trading up to get a guy is not really advantageous, but trading, except in the later rounds, but trading up in that 1st round, not advantageous. And trading back could be advantageous. For the Bears this year, though, I think moving up in this year's draft and giving up some of your 6th rounds, maybe your 3rd round, I don't think it's a bad thing, because there's only a few guys that are really talents. And so if you see one you want, and you covet him, go up there and get him. Did I have any questions this week? I had, is Danny Trevathan going to be the Bears linebacker of the future? Yeah, I mean, you paid him well. The way Ryan Pace is evaluating this draft is he's going to spend money because he's supplementing where previous administrations, especially the late Jerry Angelo days and all of the Phil Emery days, with these poor draft classes. The cupboards are bare for young talent, so he's got to go out and stock guys up while he's building up with the draft. It takes several drafts to get. If you think about the Cubs, is they had to basically wipe everything out and then start drafting talent and then cultivate that talent. So the NFL is a little different than baseball. You have to go through and make sure you have to spend a certain amount of money. And so if you're going to spend that money, you're going to try to be competitive. You sign guys that are going to be, here for a few years. Whereas Jerry Angelo was not afraid to sign a guy who was 30 years old to a big contract. Is Ryan Pace, he's willing to pay somebody on a contract, but it's going to be somebody that's in, either coming into their prime or just started in their prime, and then getting all of their contract worth out of them, and then doing that while he's trying to build through the draft. So Danny Trevathan's young, he's fast, he's got experience. His team won a Super Bowl. Barring any injury, he's going to be the next Bears good middle linebacker. And then, could the Bears consider Ezekiel Elliott in the 1st round? I don't think so. Definitely not if they're going to stay at that number 11 pick. I don't think Ezekiel Elliott is worth top 15 pick. If the Bears trade back and wind up in the second half of the 1st round, and Ezekiel Elliott is there, I think he's a good pickup. But honestly, if it's me, I would use a 2nd rounder and go with Derrick Henry, and in the 2nd round, because it's not like you have a bare cupboard with your running back. You have Jacquizz Rodgers, who I think is a solid player if he comes back healthy. But you already saw Jeremy Langford is good, and you already saw that Kadeem Carey could pick up the slack. It would just be to create a 3-headed monster. I would much rather have a Derrick Henry because he's a different type of back, and use a 2nd round pick rather than a 1st round pick on Ezekiel Elliott. I don't think there's too much difference. I think that was all it for all the questions I had. Where do the Bears go from here? Like I said, I think they're going to wind up signing some either older guys or guys coming off injuries or guys that weren't great to 1-year prove-it deals, and they're going to try to build up Because the thing is if you sign a guy to a veteran minimum deal or a low-cost deal, like a 1 year, $850,000, $1 million, $1.5 million, etc., not two huge deals, and it's 1 year thing, and they don't work out, you can cut them mid-season. It's no skin off your back. You're still within your salary cap. It's not going to hurt you for next year. And if one of them pans out, then great, win-win-win for you. With that, they did. With defensive tackles, if they don't end up getting one in the draft, is they can sign they've got Ego Ferguson who's healthy. They've re-signed Mitch Unrein, and are those the dream team there? No, but they could sign Akeem Hicks, who's a guy they clearly like. If they don't get somebody in the draft, then they could always sign bodies. They could sign several bodies and put them in there and do like they did last year and hope somebody pans out by signing quantity and seeing if you can get any quality out of that. Pass rushing outside linebackers is, like I said, you've got Willie Young, you've got Lamar Houston, you've got Pernell McPhee. Those three I think are pretty good. You'd still like somebody that was more elite, but in a pinch, Lamar Houston led the Bears in sacks last year. I think you can live with that. A left tackle, Charles Leno was your guy last year, so if need be, you could live with him. Cornerbacks, it would be nice to see another good cornerback come out of this draft, but you still have Fuller and Porter. Safety, you have Antrell Roll, who was your big offseason guy last year, even though he didn't play much. And Amos was a rookie who played really well. And then tight ends, if you don't trade Martellus, then you still have somebody there. So are they in desperate need of a position player? No. But I think to make this team better, those are the positions that they need to work on. And they still, like I said, they have a ton of draft picks to go through and be able to try to recuperate that and build up those teams. They've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 draft picks, barring any sort of trade. So I think the Bears are still going to be active in free agent. I think they probably pick up one, maybe two several year deals, like a decent deals, and then pick up some people on 1 year prove it deals, and then we build through the draft and go from there. So look for the Bears to still be active in these next couple weeks. And like I said, next week we'll be talking about the safeties in the NFL draft, and I'll have more coverage on all 4 of the major Chicago teams or sports, so all 5 teams in 4 sports. So thank you guys so much for listening to this all football episode, and until next time, bear down.
We thank Ditka and God for all they have provided.
Cubs win! Cubs win! Cubs win!
Oh, I don't want her. You can have her. She's a Packer fan. She can't fit in my van.
And she looks like Remember, New Yorkers, smoking crack is not legal on planes. Bears 31 to -7. The Bears!
Oh, when the Bears go bearing down.